51,000 gone. That's how many soldiers vanished, dead, wounded, or missing, after just 3 days in the quiet town of Gettysburg.
Bloodiest
Imagine
chapter,
a battlefield
the battle
so soaked in blood that surgeons had to stack amputated limbs in piles higher than tables, then burn them at dusk. Imagine horses burning in heaps because there were too many to bury. We're told Gettysburg was a victory that saved the Union. But few talk about what it cost, not just in lives, but in what it revealed about how far a nation could fall to fight itself. What if the true turning point of the Civil War wasn't on the field at all, but in what the survivors carried home afterward? Let's go back to Gettysburg and face the numbers history tried to bury. The Battle of Gettysburg was the largest and most brutal clash of the American Civil War, and unlike any other fought on this continent. On July 1, 1863, two massive armies collided across the fields, orchards, and wooded ridges surrounding the small Pennsylvania town of Gettysburg. For 3 relentless days, they fought with no restraint, no quarter given. The ferocity and scale of this engagement would mark it as the turning point in the great fratricidal conflict that remains the bloodiest chapter of American history. When the fighting finally ceased, nearly 30% of all soldiers engaged in the battle were gone, dead, wounded, or missing. Around 28% of General George Gordon Meade's Army of the Potomac and over 37% of General Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia perished in the carnage. An estimated 64,000 soldiers from both the Union and Confederate sides were killed, injured, or unaccounted for by the time the Gettysburg campaign in Pennsylvania came to an end. Amputated limbs piled high near makeshift field hospitals, later buried together in mass graves. The wife of Gettysburg cemetery caretaker, Elizabeth Thorne, while heavily pregnant, is said to have dug over 100 graves herself. Bodies were collected from where they fell, buried hastily across the battlefield. One of those recovered on Cemetery Ridge turned out to be a woman who had disguised herself to fight for the Confederacy. Another disguised Southern woman reportedly lost her leg while charging up the same ridge. In the days following the battle, Gettysburg and its surrounding 8 to 10 miles were transformed into a single, sprawling field hospital. Every barn, church, and home was filled with the wounded. The locals gave up nearly every space they could offer to shelter the dying and maimed. Conditions were horrifying. Many soldiers lay directly on the soaked ground, with nothing beneath them. Amputations were performed endlessly, their stumps resting in the mud. Countless men were unclothed, filthy, starving, and delirious. Surgeons worked around the clock, overwhelmed and undersupplied. During one violent thunderstorm, soldiers nearly drowned in their own makeshift camps. Both Union and Confederate soldiers suffered horribly under 19th century medical practices and the devastating effects of explosive artillery and soft-lead Minié balls. More than 2/3 of all gunshot wounds affected the arms or legs. The Minié ball's slow, heavy impact often shattered bones and left gaping exit wounds far larger than the entry holes, frequently bringing debris and fabric deep into the wound, worsening infection. One soldier recalled, "A bullet entered my right arm and went through it. As we pushed forward, a shell exploded, killing 2 of my comrades and shattering my right leg. When I was first hit, I felt only numbness, like when you strike your elbow. I thought a friend had hit me until I saw the blood. My leg gave out, and I fell. Then I realized we were surrounded." Private Jacob Henry Cole, 57th New York Infantry. Doctors treated such injuries conservatively when possible, removing bullets, debris, and bone fragments if the damage was limited. But when bones were crushed beyond repair, amputation became the only way to save a soldier's life. Despite the loss of a limb, amputation offered the best chance to avoid blood poisoning, gangrene, or streptococcal infection. Operations continued through the night, sometimes one every 10 minutes. Smaller wounds were packed with lint and bandaged if there was time. But injuries to the head, neck, chest, or abdomen were often deemed hopeless. Those soldiers were given morphine or chloroform and left to die. Sergeant Alexander Blake of the 1st Missouri Infantry recalled, "I was wounded in my left arm on Friday near Gettysburg. A musket ball cracked it above the elbow. When I reached the hospital the next day, they amputated it that afternoon. Even under chloroform, I knew little of what was happening. The pain afterward was severe, but I believe everything is healing well." In the thick of combat, soldiers were also struck in the face, often with horrifying results. Private Joseph Harvey, hit by shell fragments, described the sensation vividly. "It felt like the floodgates in my neck had burst. Blood poured everywhere. Something loose rolled around in my mouth. It was part of my jaw, teeth and all." Captured by Confederate forces, Harvey spent 11 days as a prisoner before being transferred to Alexandria's Mansion House Hospital. Portions of his jawbone were removed that August. His saliva leaked from his cheek, and he suffered facial paralysis and partial deafness. Although he later received a pension, he died in December 1868 from unknown causes. At Gettysburg, wounds like his were almost always fatal. Private Rowland, of the 4th New York Heavy Artillery, was struck by a shell fragment that obliterated his lower jaw and soft tissues, leaving his tongue hanging down his neck. He could no longer swallow or speak. The primitive plastic surgeries of the time offered slim hope, but he was one of the few who survived, though forever changed. Yet beyond bullets and shells, the greatest killer of the Civil War was not combat itself. It was disease. More soldiers died from dysentery, smallpox, malaria, and yellow fever than from wounds. Camps were overcrowded and unsanitary, and infections spread rapidly. At the war's start, doctors knew nothing of germ theory. They rarely washed their hands or sterilized their instruments between surgeries. As a result, infection was rampant, and death often came days after the battle ended. Hospital gangrene was particularly dreaded. The infection devoured flesh, turning skin gray and releasing a horrific stench. Surgeons tried airing out hospitals to reduce bacteria, but when windows faced sewage or waste pits, the disease spread even faster. Gettysburg also witnessed the deaths of more generals than any other Civil War battle. From the Confederate side, Generals Semmes, Barksdale, Armistead, Garnett, and Pender, along with Pettigrew during the retreat, were all lost. The Union lost Generals Reynolds, Zook, Weed, Farnsworth, and Vincent, posthumously promoted. Wounded Confederate officers included Major General John Bell Hood, shot in the head and permanently paralyzed in one arm, and Major General Henry Heth, also struck in the head but miraculously saved by a hat stuffed with paper dispatches that deflected the bullet. Many survivors endured what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, then called nostalgia or homesickness. Others suffered from morphine addiction, as pain relief was often administered indiscriminately. Some wounded men faced deep shame and despair, unable to work or provide for their families, while the public's uneasy reaction to their deformities only deepened their isolation. Even the battlefield's animals paid the ultimate price. Roughly 5,000 horses and mules died at Gettysburg. Their bodies were later burned in massive piles, the stench of decay lingering over the countryside for weeks, making townspeople violently ill. The guns finally fell silent at Gettysburg, but the cries did not. 51,000 gone, yet we call it a victory. A nation saved, they said, though it took the lives of sons on both sides to do it. The Union stood, but at what cost? Families torn apart, bodies unrecognizable, towns forever haunted by what their soil absorbed. Was the price of preserving a country worth the shattering of its soul? Perhaps the true battlefield wasn't the ridge or the wheat field, but the human heart that had to learn to live with what it had done. And maybe America still hasn't. If history teaches anything, it's that no victory built on so much blood can ever be clean. Subscribe, share, and remember, never to fight ourselves again. Thanks for watching.